everyone? We are back with another of the Golden Feet podcast, streaming right now only to YouTube, that Brad and I were talking about off the air. And before I welcome my returning guest, Brad Challoner, back for another episode, let's just take a look at some things going on in the NLL as we head into week 3. So welcome, Brad. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so let's just kick it off here with some things, some notes that I had, starting with coaches' calls. And I'm going to share the link to coaches' calls. Back for season 2, we discussed this briefly off the air. How does Don Koharski, the long-term NHL referee, end up on coaches' calls?
Right. It's a crazy roundabout way. But so first of all, to go back, like Koho, who's known for reffing almost 2,000 games in the NHL, one of the most respected refs of all time. 2021, he gets a job as the officials supervisor for the National Lacrosse League. And everyone's kind of like, what? Why? How? But he actually has a deep love of lacrosse that goes back to his childhood growing up in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, where he played and he coached. He was on the Nova Scotia provincial team that played at the Canada Summer Games in '73 in New Westminster.
That's crazy.
And then, but he's away from the game for 30, 35 years while he's reffing in the NHL. And now in retirement, kind of looking for something to do. And he had a chance encounter with Brian Lemon, who's one of the big wigs at the National Lacrosse League and responsible for wears a lot of different hats. And he met Koho at a golf course in Florida. And they got to talking over the pandemic, and Koho was like, how would you like me to take care of your referees and teach them the Koho way and teach them some new tips and tricks of game management to help better the game of lacrosse? And they hit it off, and then here we are 3 years later, and he's implemented a lot of cool things with the referees in the National Lacrosse League and really upped the level of game management and game flow and accountability. And he's done a fantastic job over these 3 years. And what a character the dude is, too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because I was listening to that episode. I'm just screen sharing so people can see how to get onto the Coaches Calls podcast. I mean, I found it through Apple Podcast. But one of the things I shared, and so we give a plug to the guys at Lacrosse Culture Daily as well. I shared the link in the chat so people could go in, look at Lacrosse Culture Daily, look at coaches calls, right, and just get an understanding of where you're coming from. Because I obviously, in doing research for this episode, I was looking back at some coaches calls episode that I'd missed, but also listening to your recent chat with Derek Keenan. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Well, it's called Coaches Calls, Conversations with the Leaders of Lacrosse. And I've had in season 1, I had every single head coach in the National Lacrosse League, and then spawned off to a couple of junior coaches and a couple of coaches that are retired from the league or maybe assistants. And then season 2 is like, hey, what are we going to do now? Well, Derek Keenan is the all-time winningest coach in the history of the National Lacrosse League and wasn't even supposed to be a head coach again, and really wasn't at the start of last season, which is why I didn't have him on in season 1. Jimmy Quinlan was the head coach. And then midway through the season, they make a change with their offensive coordinator. Bruce Alexander gets let go, and Derek Keenan comes from the GM box again down to the bench. But he just can't stay away. He has an absolute love for the game and a love to be a part of it. And he told me last year, Brad, I'm shopping for an offensive coordinator. I'm not coming back on the bench. And then fast forward a couple months later, and he's back on the bench. So he can't stay away. And why wouldn't you want to, right? Like, this is guy's the winningest coach in the history of the National Lacrosse League. He's got 9 championships, and the Saskatchewan Rush now have the right pieces in place, I think, to make a championship run. He wants to be a part of that. He feels responsible for the team that didn't make the playoffs the last couple of years. I think deep down he wants to be the guy that takes them back to the promised land. He said it was upper management that wanted him back on the bench, and that was part of the deal of extending his contract. But he wants to be on the bench with these guys, man. Like, Saskatchewan looks fantastic to start the season. He wants to be there, and he wants to be the guy that's there when they hopefully win that cup again one day.
Right. And so let's do this then, because we talked about that episode with Derek, and we're going to obviously I had a structured thing I sent to you, but there's a couple of things I wanted to share here, because I was looking at one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was 2 weeks in the NLL, and then week 3 is this week. And there's a number of games, obviously. And I was looking at the NLL's website with the week 3 preview actually with the power rankings. So that kind of could actually lead right into that Saskatchewan Rush chunk that I found in the week 3 power rankings. I'm just going to scroll down to it here because the Rush are taking on the Halifax Thunderbirds on Saturday. And there's some interesting information I'll share on the Rush. Obviously, there's only 2 weeks into the season. The Rush are 1-0, right? They had a bye week last week. They play Halifax this week. But I wanted to just share a little bit about Saskatchewan because obviously Frank Sigliano is there. But there's in this ranking, the Rush have all the ingredients to be a playoff contender, but our knowledge base on this group is still limited. Their next big test is this one against the T-Birds. Can you share a little bit about that game then? Like, do you have any sort of thoughts on that game as one of the games this week?
Yeah, and for some reason, over the last couple of years too, Halifax and Saskatchewan play electric games, like high-scoring, barn-burning lacrosse games. These two teams over the last couple of years they've matched up really well to create entertaining brand lacrosse. They've both been run and gun. They've both been able to fill the net. So I suspect the same out of this team. I think Halifax putting up 17 goals in week 1 bodes well. They have some new bodies coming to that offense. We weren't sure how they were going to fit in, but they worked. And same thing for the Saskatchewan Rush. They've got a couple rookies in their lineup. Brock Haley scored 2 goals in week 1. They had Austin Shanks, who's got chemistry with Ryan Keenan and some of the Whitby boys on that lineup, and has worked with Derek Keenan before. And they looked fantastic in week 1 too. So I think it is a really good test early. Halifax is going to be hungry coming off the loss, and Saskatchewan is going to be fired up to prove that they can hang. Any team can win one game, but can you start putting together a streak? And I think the thing that's been missing from the Rush over the last couple of years, Ben, and Derek Keenan mentioned this on the podcast, is consistency. Good teams have to go on runs. They have to win 4 or 5 in a row. They have to have winning streaks throughout a season because these crushing up and down games are a big blow. You have a good performance, then you get blown out the next week. That's not a recipe for success. So if the Rush want to find it this year, get on the right foot, I think they got a good chance to do it against a team that they've had really entertaining games and successful games against over the last couple seasons. So mark that one on the calendar. Like, that is early season, can't miss lacrosse between Saskatchewan and Halifax. I think it'll be similar to the game we saw Halifax play last week against Calgary. Like, this could be a 16-15 open scoring game again.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at that Calgary Roughnecks Albany Firewolves game based on those week 3 rankings, the power rankings from the NLL website, and I actually shared in the chat here a link to Derek Keenan's Wikipedia page and the blurb on this game. But this Albany Firewolves game, obviously against Calgary, there's some good storylines there. I've highlighted a couple things I want your comment on. One of them obviously is what's happening in Calgary, and I've discussed this previously in the podcast. Steve Ewan joined me. My friend Earl Thomas joined me. We talked about no Christian Del Bianco in Calgary. Then you read that Christian's building a bench with his uncle on Twitter while this game is going on against Calgary. He's
trolling. He's trolling right now. He said that he doesn't want to be in Calgary, and now he's just teased everybody. I don't know. I don't want to sound like, I'm not an old dude. I don't want to sound like an old dude, but Delbs needs to lay off the Twitter a little bit because he's just poking the beast right now. He's just stirring the pot, which he loves to do. But I don't know what good it's doing at this point in the season. But anyways, Calgary has everything except for a goaltender, and that's no disrespect to Bowman and to McLeod, who were there. But they're young and unproven. They have one combined win in the National Lacrosse League in like 300 minutes or something like that. Like they have everything but a proven number 1 goaltender, so they're gonna have to score their way out of a lot of problems, which is exactly what they did last week against Halifax. This is a team that's going to need to put up 13, 14, 15 a night to be successful, I think, unless McLeod can really find his footing and shut the door and use that experience that he built up at the World Championship. But they could do it. Like, with that offense, Dane Dobie and Curtis Dixon have come in some of the best shape of their lives with a chip on their shoulder.
Their performance.
Jesse King is one of the game's elites, and they've got some good young pieces coming back. Tyler Pace just re-signed. He's going to add to that lineup now too. So it's a silly offense, silly, creative, and exceptionally talented offense. They've got a good group of core young guys on their D. They just need to fill that hole in the net. But I think they're going to try to score their way out of problems. That's not traditionally a recipe for success in the National Lacrosse League. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens if they can swing a deal for a goaltender. Or here's a wacky thought: do they get so good that Del Bianco is tempted to come back? Can they go 6-0 to start the season and battle for a top playoff spot? And now Del Bianco is going, maybe I can come have another run with Dixon and Dobie and my old pals in Calgary. Like, does he get? It's tough for these guys to sit back. They're so competitive. And if Calgary's a playoff team and all they're needing is Del Bianco to come back, cool. That's my wild conspiracy theory for the season. Delbs gets.
Okay. So let's keep going here because I've got the other games coming up, and then we'll probably wrap it up with those. I got one other question. So this Buffalo Bandits Ottawa Black Bears game, boy, oh boy. I said it to Brett Mitski earlier in the week on the podcast and on when we did the live stream, sort of like the David and Goliath of the NLL. I mean, I think we know who the Goliath is, not to knock Ottawa, because obviously the Ottawa Black Bears are the moved New York Riptide. But this game looks interesting to me. I was looking at some sort of storylines, and I'm like, okay, Buffalo, you saw what happened with Buffalo last week. How does this game shake out?
Yeah, Buffalo, like they're looking to be the second team all time to three-peat in the National Lacrosse League, right? The last two championships, no one's three-peated since the Rochester Nighthawks of 2011 to 2014, I think it was. And Rochester played them hard in that first game, but I think it only took 3 quarters for the Bandits then to wake up, and they finally pulled ahead in that fourth and looked like the team that is destined to win 3 championships in a row. But they go into Ottawa, which had the big win on home floor, have the momentum to play in that new unfamiliar barn, have the best player in the world and Jeff Teat on their lineup, finally have themselves a bona fide number 1 goaltender in Zach Higgins. That's not going to be an easy game for Buffalo to roll into. Ottawa is a much different team, I think, than the New York Riptide were. So I know it's week 3, Ben, but there's some tasty matchups.
Well, there is, and that's the thing. We'll save the best one for last, and we can talk a little about the Rochester Nighthawks, obviously in Vancouver, to take on the Warriors. And just some news that I saw yesterday coming down about. Before we get to that game, I'll look at the other ones. Just looking at one thing here, because the Nighthawks themselves have declared that Rylan Hartley will not be in net for week 3 against Vancouver. But before we get to that game, that's just some news I wanted to share. Let's take a look at this Colorado Mammoth San Diego Seals game. Colorado 2-0 to start the season. We know what happened between them and the Warriors in week 1. We know where the Seals sit. What are your thoughts on this game?
This is another one that's similar to Halifax and Saskatchewan, minus playoff appearances against each other. So this is one of the best rivalries in the National Lacrosse League, and it's a fresh one. It's only a couple years old, but it is absolutely electric when Colorado and San Diego get together too. So this week just keeps getting better and better. They don't play bad lacrosse games against each other. I think the Mammoth are back. I think they were hungover last year, and when you talk to some of their players and their coaching staff, they definitely underperformed last year. I think they thought things were going to come a little bit easier to them, and they forgot what it takes. They forgot the hard work that it takes to grind offensive loose balls and get second possessions and come back in games. It felt like it came easy to them in the 2 years that they went to the finals, but it was hard work that got them there. They forgot that last year. They had a really intense training camp, and they're back. Like, they're so back, and I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the league this season. Dylan Ward was in fine form. Being back as one of the top goaltenders. Ryan Lee, you just don't lose when Ryan Lee's in the lineup. He's such a difference maker. And it's nice to see him moving around on that knee again fearlessly and doing what he does. And Connor Kelly, the American righty, I like my little guys, right? I'm a little guy. So I like, Sean Evans, Dane Dobie, Kyle Buchanan. Like, these have been some of my favorite players over the years. And now Connor Kelly is becoming one of those guys. That was 5'9" firecrackers, but the way that he shoots the ball, and he's got this unique jump shot and a really deceptive release. It can put the ball anywhere. He's becoming one of my favorite players to watch, and he's been electric to start the season for Colorado. And then San Diego, they just almost snuck it out in Georgia, went to OT, had that big win in week 1. they look pretty good too. They need some chemistry to build on their offense. They missed Trey Leclerc last week, but with Chris Origlieri and Wes Berg and the team that they've assembled there, it's going to be another fantastic game between those two teams that match up really well.
We shouldn't leave off this. We covered this. We shouldn't leave off this Las Vegas Desert Dogs Philadelphia Wings game. Is there any interesting storylines in that one? Maybe we should have talked about that one a little earlier. Is there? What do you know about that one? Because we're going to get obviously to Rochester and Vancouver, but we still got to discuss Toronto and Georgia. But let's do that. Game with the. Let me just find it with the Dogs.
Well, the Dogs and Wings is simple. Like they both haven't won yet, so they're both hungry. Vegas needs to prove that they're trending in the right direction with their young group and their rookie class that's playing in that lineup. And Philly needs to prove that they can play under their new head coach and in their new system and Brennan O'Neill and get him integrated into that lineup. So they're both hungry lacrosse teams. That's going to be a chippy, nasty game because I think both those teams have really something to prove and have a lot of weight on their backs to be successful. Philly should be one of the marquee teams and markets in the National Lacrosse League, but they haven't had success since they've kind of returned to Philly, which is a couple playoff appearances and some early bounces here and there. That should be a flagship franchise, but they need to be successful, and they feel that weight. And then Vegas is not an expansion team anymore. Yeah, they're the newest team, one of the newest teams, but they don't have anything to show for it yet. They don't feel like they're the newest team. They feel like they should be able to hang with everybody. So these are two teams that really have a chip on their shoulder, and I think that game's going to be an absolute war.
Right, and this Toronto Rock Georgia Swarm game, I was reading about that. Obviously, they're trying to dig a little bit more into the Rock just because of their 0-2 start, which maybe people didn't expect.
They've been so injury riddled, man. Like they're missing Tom Schreiber, they're missing Challoner Rogers. They are absolutely depleted. And Georgia, I think, is going to be one of the best teams in the league this season.
Right.
So this is not going to be I don't think it's going to be a great start for the season for Toronto. They have not been scoring goals, and I don't think that they're going to be able to bounce back against a Georgia Swarm team who was rolling in week 2, their first game of the year.
Yeah. Well, let's get finally to the game tomorrow night in Vancouver, starting at 7.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Because that's not important to us. So we had Brett Mitzke on the podcast on Tuesday. We talked about their week 1 game against the Colorado Mammoth. We talked about some silver linings in that game despite the loss, and obviously we've talked about Colorado. And we talked about Rochester a little bit with their news about their starting goaltender being out. A couple things I had for you, because there's some tweets where people were like, well, who's this other goalie that's going to play for Rochester, Kevin Orleman? So I actually went and looked him up, because I'm assuming he's starting. He only had 58 seconds, in that game, in the last game, and he faced 1 or 2 shots. But when I looked up Kevin purely out of curiosity, this is not a guy who has no NLL, sort of experience, right? Like he played in Georgia, 10 games in 2018, 18 games in 2019, 2020 for Georgia, it says 12. Panther City played 17. Just looking at some of his stats here, I shared that in the chat. Is this going to be a major storyline for this game, or storyline, whatever you want to call it, for tomorrow?
Rochester also has Riley Hutchcraft, who started their last 2 games this season with Hartley out. So he'll be the number 1 guy that comes in, and he's a guy who's played as a practice roster guy for the Toronto Rock, and then came to Rochester, and he's been serviceable. He put some really good minutes up to start this season in their home opener win, and then really limiting the Buffalo Bandits for 3 quarters and change before they open things up. So Hutchcraft will be the guy. Orleman will back him up until Hartley is healthy, and Orleman will be a serviceable backup too, man. Like this guy you mentioned, he's got some experience in the National Lacrosse League, but he hasn't been a number 1 yet. But they feel comfortable enough in that threesome that they didn't go out and make a splashy trade in the offseason. They didn't try to improve their goaltending. They're happy with the crop that they have. They're showing a lot of faith in those guys. But yeah, Hutchcraft's the guy we're going to see come into Vancouver just tomorrow night.
Okay. Obviously, we have to check in about the lacrosse gods. What's happening there?
Getting stronger and stronger every day, man. Getting stronger and stronger. I was thinking about because I knew you were going to ask me about the lacrosse gods. I just wanted to provide an example of what that means. And I remember just a moment where the Georgia Swarm were in Vancouver a couple seasons ago, and usually when the players are doing their pregame stretches, sticks can just be kind of like strewn about on the turf. Your helmets and gloves and sticks are kind of just laying around. Some guys will lean it up on the wall, but at the time, the Swarm had 3 Thompson brothers. They had Jeremy, they had Miles, and they had Lyle. And you watched how those 3 guys treated their sticks, and they lined them up in like perfect symmetry on the turf with their gloves and helmets like beautifully laid. It was like a photo opportunity, the way that they displayed their weapons for that night, or their wands, however you want to put it. And what struck me about that was just the attention and the care that they put into their sticks. And to me, that's honoring lacrosse gods. And it's little things like that. If you honor the gods and play the right way, good things will happen. And good things certainly have happened in the career of Lyle Thompson, especially his Georgia Swarm. And just, again, watching the way that they played last weekend, it's just a squeaky clean team with people that respect the game on that roster. And they're going to be a tough team to beat this season.
Okay. Last thing.
What about you? What about you, man? What are the lacrosse gods mean to you? You've been coming to Warriors games now for a few years, and you obviously have a big affinity for this game. What do they mean to you?
I don't know. It's a really tough question to answer. I always think about it, and it always makes me laugh. I think the biggest thing for me in doing and having conversations with you and people on my show or on the Golden V podcast, it's not just my show, is I always feel like I'm there to learn, and I'm trying to scale up and learn about this game and sort of how this game works. And so maybe they're guiding me that way. And I just feel like it's a real learning opportunity to learn about the game. I don't really know how to, sort of answer the gods question. I mean, initially when you ask it every time, I expect it and it makes me laugh. Now you're going to make me think. So that's actually
I really love what you said though there about the education portion. Maybe that is, and it sounds like you're being open to the fact that the gods could be pointing you in a certain direction, and whether that's spirituality, whether that's the universe, or whether that's just us putting names to things. I don't know, but I think that's a pretty cool answer that I haven't heard from anybody else. Is that it's pushing you in a direction to learn more about the game. There's a calling there. There's a deep calling there that you can't deny.
Well, there is, and the other thing is, I feel like the gods need to give the Warriors a break. And I don't I think people I heard from Brett on Tuesday, and I heard about, how this is from the Warriors reporter. She's new. Her name's Jill Meager. Just about how this is going to be, like a highest attended game. It's over 10,000. They hadn't sold any more tickets. And I'm like, okay, guys, people have the expectation of you, and it's hard to match those expectations. I feel like the Warriors really need to deliver tomorrow night against Rochester, even though it's early in the season.
Well, we know that they play honest. This is Kurt Milowski on down. They play honest lacrosse. They play two-hand tough lacrosse. They're a very disciplined and responsible team. They can get physical, but they're going to do it in a very responsible way that's going to make them stay out of the box. And they need to bounce back. They see all that's happening. They know about the season tickets. They know about the market buzz. They know about the support they're getting from management on down. And now it's up to the players to put wins together on the floor. They feel that weight, but that's a good weight to have. Pressure is a privilege, right? You earn that expectation. I think the Warriors are at that stage now, and a great chance to do. Like Rochester, we didn't talk about this, but Rochester hasn't been here. Rochester, this incarnation of the Rochester Nighthawks since they've expanded has never been to Rogers Arena. They haven't been as a franchise here since 2017, the Langley Event Center. And before that, it was when they won the championship in the Langley Event Center as the Nighthawks against the Washington Stealth, who came up north to play the championship game here in 2013 because the circus was literally in town in Washington and they couldn't play their home date down in Everett. So that to me was like the precipice of the National Lacrosse League returning full time here was that game that the Nighthawks were a part of against the Stealth. And now here we are in 2024. It's the Vancouver Warriors. It's the Rochester Nighthawks again, and there's some intensity on the line. Everything's on the line.
Thank you, Brad. Let's wrap it up there. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you as well. And I'll be sure to send out, share the completed podcast with you. Obviously, going to be on the YouTube channel. Send you the link, and then I'll download the video and audio portions and put it in the podcast format. I want to thank you for doing this again. A couple things before we go. Make sure you guys check out on the Lacrosse Culture Daily podcast. Coach's Calls, lacrosseculturedaily.com. Facebook.com/Golden V Podcast is our Facebook page. Buzzsprout.com/1869778 is the Buzzsprout page that hosts the Golden V Podcast. Or you can type in your web browser, goldenvpodcast.ca. We'll wrap it up there.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. See you soon.
Thanks, Brad.